Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeaniel Whint, a nutrition manager and a holistic nutritionist, as well as a chef with over 10 years of experience in the field. And today we are going to be talking about food security, understanding the difference between best before and expiry date. First and foremost, I would like to express my sincerest thanks to the Rexdale Women's Center for the opportunity to share on this very important topic with you today. It's a concern to many, and there have been so many reports coming up in the news. There's so many different um, conversations happening around this topic when it comes to food security and understanding the dates. And today we just want to dive in and see how we can explain so that we can go forward in terms of our buying experience to make it from an educational standpoint versus not being sure what to do, when, and how. As a nutritionist and a holistic manager, I take every opportunity that comes my way to educate others on the importance of leading a healthy lifestyle with good quality nutrition. So, first and foremost, it's really impossible to talk about food security without identifying what food insecurity is. And basically, it's just the insufficient or unstable access to food because of financial limitations. This is my interpretation of a definition when it comes to food insecurity. And one reason contributing to that food insecurity today is the misunderstanding of or the lack of education as it relates to best before dates versus expiry dates. So I would like this session to be a little bit interactive. So I would start by asking these questions, and please feel free to chime in and let's chat about this. What are your interpretation of the best before dates versus expiry dates?
It's a very confusing information. So I always look at it as best before date. Like if there's a date that is given that you can't eat after that date. And expiry means it's just completely done.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Yeah, it is very confusing, and that's what we're going to do a little bit of a debunking and then actually have quality information that can really educate us along these lines, right?
Yeah. Harminder
And
said I always felt both are the same and they have the
no,
same.
they're not. No, they're not the same. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And interesting enough, because, even before doing like this in-depth research, even in my own household, like, most households in Canada, we follow the best before dates. Like even when we're shopping, right? If something is close to the best before date, we wouldn't buy it. But as we're going to learn today, best before dates, there's a specific reason as to why they do it, and it does not necessarily mean that the food cannot be consumed. Okay, and here it is. Best before dates. So the best before dates refers to a specific time frame that an unopened product maintain its optimal freshness, nutritional value, and quality for consumption. And by government standards, these products have a shelf life of 90 days or less. So in essence, the best before date is all about quality, right? So it doesn't mean that a product cannot be consumed after the best before date. It just may not be at its best. And we're going to talk about the time frame, specific items, how long after the best before date it can actually be consumed. We're going to talk about that. I try to put references at the bottom of most of the slides so that we have um, a backdrop in terms of where the information came from. And a lot of this research you'll see, I pulled it from the Food Inspection Agency of Canada, the government website. And that's partially because I want to ensure that the information we're getting today is credible. And at the same time, it follows the guidelines that our government is adhering to and allowing us to follow. Okay. So, expiry date. The expiry date is the last possible date that a food should be consumed. In Canada, there are five specific food categories that must have expiry dates. And obviously, for good reason. It usually is consumed by members of our society that are vulnerable. And these includes baby formulas and other milk substitutes, people that are on liquid diets. So that could be individuals in the ICU, of hospitals, people that are very weak and or people coming out of post-surgery, especially now there's so many gastrointestinal issues happening, and sometimes for medical reasons, they have to resort to some form of liquid diet until their body is able to go back to eating semi-solid or solid foods or whatever capacity their health would allow. Nutritional supplements also has expiry date. Meal replacement, pre-packaged foods with durable life 90 days or less. And of course, this is very important to note. These foods that are foods that have life like a lifespan greater than 90 days is not mandatory, it's totally voluntary. And it gives that sense of ease to the consumer, right? And when it comes to expiry date, it's totally about the food safety of the product. Obviously, for our less vulnerable citizens, we do not want them to be eating anything that can cause them any harm. Okay, what do you guys think about that information? Like now that I've given a bit of a description of both the best before date and the expiry date, what do you think about that? Does that make sense to you? Have you thought of it in that light? Does it share new perspective?
Yes, I would say I was actually not expecting that there will be so much of difference between the best before and the expiry date. I always assumed if a product has a best before, I make sure I use it before that date. If it's the same day or if I cross it, I just dump it.
Yeah. And this is what the conversation is about, right? Because we do so much of that, and that is contributing to a lot of food waste in Canada. Other dates that are commonly used are use by dates or freeze by dates or prepared on dates. And again, these dates are not necessarily mandatory, but they do add a lot of value to us as consumers to guide our choices. The most important thing here is that when these dates are printed on products, they must be truthful. And, the Canadian Food and Inspection Agency, they monitor this, right? So if they do an audit of a supplier or a manufacturer, the dates that are printed on products need to be what they said it is. If not, there are a lot of fines and penalties attached to fraudulently putting dates on products just to make a sale. Okay. So how is it presented? And this information I took directly word for word, quote, it's a direct quote from the Health Canada's website. And the best before date must be identified by using the words best before or meilleur avant, which is the French translation because we are bilingual. So as a result of that, labeling on packaging should be and is both English and French, right? Together with the date. And these can appear anywhere on the package, right? And if they are at the bottom, the placement should be indicated elsewhere on the label. It's important to note here that, like I said, the month of expiry must be in both official languages and or indicated by the specified bilingual symbol. And that's like usually the short form for the month. So like January would be JA, February would be FE, that kind of thing. Like they said here, the year is optional unless it's needed for clarity. And that's probably where you would see the year on when it comes to the expiry, right? It also lets you know that the year, if this is a format, the year must appear first, followed by the month and then the day. Okay, so when we're going shopping and we're looking at whether it's a best before or expiry, this is a format that it should take. What's very important to note here in the midst of all of this lack of information and even us having this opportunity to learn today is that food security is affecting everyone. Numerous news outlets, including CBC and CTV, are reporting a projected 60% increase in the use of food banks and other agencies that serve at-risk sectors of our population in this year of 2023, with even larger percentages expected in the coming years. And it's no longer limited to just unemployed individuals, right? We're dealing with the lack of information, the rising cost of living, because we all know, like, we're in this environment where globally there are so many challenges as it relates to just security in every capacity: job security, food security, housing security, right? And we're all beginning to feel the pinch. So agencies like Second Harvest or food banks that usually secure large quantities of foods, their goal is to redistribute this to individuals in the community that needs it most. However, you know, understanding, which is what we're doing today, understanding best before dates does not mean that a food is no longer edible. It's very important because oftentimes these agencies would get these foods in large supplies from the big tail retailers that the retailers would try their best to sell the food before that best before date, right? But as it comes close to the best before date, agencies like Second Harvest and other food banks, have that opportunity to get those foods because the retailers may not want to sell it, but it doesn't mean the food is bad, right? For us as a community, because we have that lack of understanding, if we have the opportunity to, whether there's a food drive or you get donated foods, we are often very reluctant to receive those foods because when we look at the date, it's like, oh, the best before date, and so a lot of food still gets dumped because of that lack of knowledge. And it's a worry for all of us. It's a concern that we all experience. Again, like I said, obviously there are some products that they even go bad before the best before date. And we're going to talk a little bit as to why that happens, right? Because not everything has to do with the product itself. Some things can be affected by temperature, how is it stored, in the process of getting it from warehouse to the actual grocery store. Like, was the temperature maintained? Did they have a breakdown on the way? Was all of these little things, was it put into the right place? So many different things could affect the quality of food. So again, as we educate ourselves, let's not limit our education to just the best before dates, right? So here are some challenges to us as consumers. The lack of understanding around the best before dates leaves many of us reluctant to receive or utilize edible food because of a date, right? And I know I'm repeating it because really essentially it's the same thing, right? As a society, we throw out so much usable food that would not necessarily cause us any ill effect based on the time frame that we consume it after that best before date, right? And again, we're not aware of the longevity of products, right? After the best before date. But we will talk about that later in this session. What's good about the best before date, as well as we talk about it focusing on quality, it is okay to recognize that, you know, if you eat a product after the best before date, you may not get the full nutritional value of it. It may lose a percentage, but it doesn't mean that you're going to lose all of it, right? So this is a very important question. What is our government doing? Okay. In 2020, the Ministry of Agriculture launched a food waste reduction challenge program as a means to support innovators to create innovative ways of preventing food waste from farm to table. Because it is estimated that we waste approximately $40 billion worth of food annually, and it's totally avoidable. Here is a direct quote from the minister, or the then Minister of Agriculture, because I know there's been a bit of a shift and I'm not sure if she's still the Minister of Agriculture. But her quote says, reducing food waste is necessary for so many reasons. It can help us save money. It improves food security, right? Because we would actually consume some of the products that we're using, or we have in our pantry, versus throwing it out and not knowing if we could afford the next grocery bill. You know, it supports efficiency in the agriculture and food sector and significantly reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Through this exciting challenge, and that is the challenge of the food waste reduction program, the government is finding new ways of reducing food waste across the supply chain. You know, we are not all innovators, but there's still stuff that we can do, you know, even in our small communities, like we do here at the Rexdale Women's Center with the reduce, reuse, and recycle program, right? There are numerous agencies and organizations, including the House of Commerce Agricultural Committee, that is calling on the government to eliminate the best before date in an effort to reduce waste. To date, the government has not made a definite decision on the matter, but research shows that many European countries like Britain have eliminated the best before date, and they have documented a reduction in food waste. Locally, the city of Toronto, for instance, continues to support and implement community reduce and reuse programs, like I said, like the one at the Rexdale Women's Center. And it is a part of a bigger waste management strategy that partners with the community. The city also partners with other cities around Canada and the National Zero Waste Council, together with large retailers, to collaboratively work towards reducing waste. What are your thoughts on all of this? Let's talk about this. Like, how do you feel about some of what I've just shared? And how do you think it would influence your decision in your grocery shopping going forward?
I think it's good that, I was just gonna say, I think it's good that that food, obviously, that is best before is still usable, and it's important to keep in track with your pantry just in case, because you don't need to waste all your food.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyone else? Sorry, I didn't hear that. Yeah, so like the speaker just said, it's important to keep track of your pantry. That's critical, and at the same time, like when you understand that the best before date does not mean the food is bad, it saves you some money because like you can plan your grocery or even your menu to utilize some of the products in your pantry before your next grocery shopping, right? And that's so important because so many people it's on um, a very restrictive budget right now, right?
Yeah, I agree because now everything is so expensive due to inflation, and a lot of people, even though the cost of living is going up, that does not mean the wages are going up. So a lot of people are depending on sales, on food banks and other sorts to get what they need for their families, and to understand that if it says best before date, like just understanding the best before date and expiry date makes a huge difference for those who do not understand and may otherwise just throw food away just because they think, best before date means if it's not, if it passed that particular day, it's no good. So I think understanding and having the resources is very important.
That's very, very critical because to add to that, like during the pandemic, I volunteered with an organization where we would literally go pick up food and then try to find other organizations to redistribute it, or go into communities and redistribute it. And people were happy to have the food, but again, once they noticed the best before date, they were like, no, I can't use it, right? So there is a need, and obviously being able, like people don't, because of the stigma surrounding like getting donated foods or even having to use a food bank is not comfortable for most people. We people that use these agencies use it because it is really their last resort. And again, you still have to eat. Like as I do these talks, sometimes I do talks with other groups of people, some of which are on ODSP, and it's as much as they're getting something, they still have to decide, okay, am I paying my rent? Or am I eating 3 meals a day? Or am I eating 1 meal a day? And it's very unfortunate, and sad to think that we're in a country where they're documenting billions of dollars worth of food is being wasted, and there's people right here. Like oftentimes you think of the other country, when you listen to news report, you think of the other countries, where you may hear that you might feel uncomfortable, but like right here people are struggling to eat. And I mean, we need to eat to live. There's no way around it, right? So it's the challenge is real, and I hope that this is a first of many conversations that we can have here, and even the information we learn here we can share with other people. Start that conversation. Explain, encourage people to read, do their own research. That we can all do our bit to reduce that waste, because I mean that is a lot of wastage and a lot of money. Could you imagine if we all got maybe 0.5% of that $49 billion every year, what that would do for us? I'm sure we have great mathematicians on the forum here. Like, could you imagine what that can do for us? you know? So it's like, okay, so here's the other question. What can we do?
I
I
think
mentioned some of the things, but like what are other ideas that you guys have?
I think Kadian has her hands up. Kadian, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think what I was gonna say before it goes into what you're talking about now, what we can do. I think we have to be wise about the purchases that we make, how we purchase and how we meal plan. Because if we're fortunate enough to be able to purchase enough food, we also have to think about how we purchase food, because how many times do we go to the store, we buy something and say, oh, I didn't even realize I already had 2 of these already. And then you put it at the front instead of putting it at the back and then putting the old ones at the front.
Oh,
So, and you,
absolutely.
right. And then you have kids, like they want a new cereal, but they won't finish the half of the box that they already do. And then they open the new one. And then after a few weeks, they say, oh, that one, no, don't you see the date? I need to throw it out. So making sure to have conversations with your family to say, you know what, we're going to finish the food we have in our house before we start to buy new ones. Or what your mom used to do, look in the cupboards and say, what do I have? What can I make a meal out of it and make something new?
Absolutely. I love what you just said. And I feel like you were here with me when I was preparing the second half of my slides, because we're definitely going to cover that again. But I'm happy you brought it up because these are critical things, like the conversations we have in our households, within our own circle of friends and our communities. Because again, like with children, and it's unavoidable, like children, I mean, when we were younger, we may not have had as many options as they do now, and we try to give our children a better life compared to what we had, obviously. So it's like, yes, they have the choices. And if you don't teach your children the importance of finishing one thing before going on to the next, you know, you would have a problem. And oftentimes in that desire to give option, it is true. We often have two, three, sometimes four different boxes of cereal open all at the same time. I mean, we can only eat one bowl of cereal at a time, right? And sometimes, yeah, food go waste because, like our speaker said, which is also true, and it's something that is applied. Because, like I said, I have a culinary background. I am a chef, so in the culinary world, we use something called first in, first out, right? It's applied throughout industry, right? Where the produce or the products that would have been purchased before the new shipment comes in must be shifted to the front so it can be consumed first. And it's very true. Sometimes when we do grocery shopping in our home, we don't do that, And I mean, I'm not the only person in my home, so my own household is guilty of this. Like I can go into the pantry right now and I would find cans in the back with an older date on it compared to those in the front, right? So education and having that conversation in the household is a good place to start. So here are a few storage tips. Um, Check temperatures at which foods are being stored. That's part of the issue within the food chain. And I know sometimes we see it. We will go to the grocery store and you can see that the employees, they may be restocking, right? But you look at certain items that should be refrigerated, but it may just be in the aisle for an extended period of time, right? And by the time they are completing stocking it, in that time, bacteria would have started. You know, According to health standards, bacteria grow between 4 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius, right? So that it's almost like that room temperature frame of or range of temperature there is so it's critical for us, but it's also critical for bacteria, right? So how are foods being stored? What temperature? Now we are in the summer months. Imagine when food is transported to a retailer and it pulled off the truck, but it may not go into the refrigerator right away or the freezer, right? That thawing or refreezing that can happen, right? And then when you think of the time for them to bring out a certain number of boxes at a time to restock what we can actually see and purchase, there's so much fluctuation in temperatures there. And there's a reason why this is heavily tracked by the ministry. And that's a reason why public health shows up unannounced at any given time. And, working in the industry, I can tell you, they show up unannounced at any given time because what they want to see is we have as a government put protocols in place to ensure food safety, as you as employers, employees, doing all that you can to follow those guidelines and those protocols to keep food safe, right? And that goes from whether you are in going to the grocery store or going to a restaurant, right? There are protocols in place to try to eliminate that. And sometimes it is not followed as best as it can be. And that's one of the reasons why I often find that happens with certain milk products. You may buy a milk product or like a yogurt, for instance, and days before the best before date, it's not good, right? So is it the best before date that's a problem, or is it the possibility in terms of the way it was handled from the time it came from the maybe the warehouse of the supplier to actually getting into your fridge that they may have had issues in the way it was stored or kept, right? Packaging is another very critical thing. Oftentimes we are told, and we know this, you're not going to purchase something if the seal is broken, right? And something that's very critical as when it regards cans, it is advised to not purchase cans that have been dented, right? Because there could be a break in the structure of the can, that we may not be able to see with the visible eye, but that may contribute to microbacteria getting in, right? And when it comes to whether it's what we do at home or in restaurants or hospitals or large circles, is food being refrigerated or frozen after opening, and is it if like right after, and is it being sealed properly, right? These are critical things that we need to pay attention to in an effort to keep our food as fresh as possible and that we can actually utilize it, without having to throw it out. All right. We are just going to quickly go onto the Government of Canada's website so I can show you some of their guidelines, and I hope this works. It should work. We're just going to navigate through here. And what we're going to be looking at is foods that can be kept for a while and what is the best ways of storing it. So we're going to focus on fridge and freezer storage, right? And we are on the Government of Canada website, right? Yeah, so here are, according to our government, foods that can be kept sometimes beyond what we think is the best before date, and what's the duration if it is stored properly, right? So we have meats, it can be refrigerated 2 to 4 days. Ground beef is very particular, 1 to 2 days, because ground beef have that tendency of the bacteria growing a lot faster. And part of it is, when you ground meat, that's a mechanical process of grounding. It just seems to somehow be a breeding ground for bacteria if not handled properly. So it always, ground meat always has a shorter refrigeration time. But like we can see here, if foods are properly stored, that means maybe you may have to double wrap it or triple wrap it, right, to prevent some of the freezer burn. And if it is kept at the consistent freezing temperature of minus 18 degrees or lower, beef can be kept 10 to 12 months, pork 8 to 12. Ground meat, like I said, we see it's a shorter time. When we go to poultry, again, it's all about how you store it, right? Sorry, go ahead.
Are we supposed to be looking at something? Because we just look at the food storage guideline, or is it a link, or?
It is a link. I'm sorry, I thought you guys were able to see it.
I'm not able to see. I don't know. Do you? Does anyone see the link?
No, we are seeing on the same
No,
slide.
I just see the white page.
Okay.
1 second. Because I'm seeing it on my end. Okay, that's okay. Hmm. So you're not seeing, you're still seeing the same thing?
Yes, we're just seeing the white page with food storage guideline.
Sometimes on Zoom, it does that and you have to stop sharing and share again. Sometimes that works.
Okay, let's try that. Because this is important. Oh, here we go. Thank you, guys. I apologize. So now you can see it.
Yes,
Yes.
Okay. All right.
thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. So let's do this again. This is all good. Yeah. So like I said, these are guidelines that the government, Health Canada has so that we can understand foods that can be stored for an extended period of time if properly stored, right? So again, we see that beef, so red meat can be stored up to 12 months with the exception of ground beef or ground meat. So that's whether it's chicken, pork, beef, right? Turkey and chicken can be stored 2 to 3 days if refrigerated. Uh, the whole, meaning that you're not cutting into it, a year, pieces, 6 months. Um, and again, like when it comes to, like for instance, let's use a chicken. When you wrap the whole chicken, you didn't take time to cut, and dissect that chicken, right? Because obviously, the few minutes you may take to dissect that chicken, there's a possibility the temperature can get up to the above 4 degrees, which is the refrigerated temperature range. It can get above that. And once it's above that, bacteria would begin to grow. And bacteria multiplies very rapidly, right? So anytime we're dealing with pieces of meat, it is always a shorter shelf life versus a whole. And we see that here in terms of the freezing. Whereas refrigeration, it has the same time frame because the expectation is that it would be cooked and consumed, within the 2 to 3 days. Okay. So we see that. And again, on the government website, there is a lot of information. I really wanted to open this so that you can see clearly, so you don't feel intimidated, right? There is information out there, very viable information that can help you in terms of how you make choices when it comes to purchasing food, storing food, and of course, these give you great ideas, right? So let me ask, like, what do you do with your eggs if it passed best before date? Anyone?
That's a great question, actually.
I will still bake with it.
Yeah, because like eggs, even though there may be a best before date on eggs, eggs are still good up to 2, 3 weeks after the best before date. I mean, it's an egg, it's unopened,
Yeah.
right? It's so it's still totally usable. Obviously, if you're buying egg products like the liquid eggs that has been pasteurized, that obviously you may want to follow the guidelines. Some of them are still good after the best before date, but of course you use your best judgment. Your smell, your sense of smell when it comes to eggs. Like if an egg is bad, you would know it's bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You would know, and I mean, even the pasteurization is a way of preserving it, right? To extend that shelf life a little bit. So we have that. milk products. I think this dairy is where you have um, a lot of wastage, right? Am I correct about this?
No, I have a quick question about eggs. In some countries other than North America, eggs don't go in the fridge.
Yeah,
Outside.
I know. Because I mean, I grew up in the Caribbean and we didn't refrigerate our eggs. Um, over time, I think that one will come down to personal choice. Within the context of where we live right now, they recommend refrigeration. So we try to adhere to that. Some of us, uh, I think I'm going to be honest with you. From my perspective as a baker, um, I refrigerate my eggs. However, based on the product I'm making, I may still need to take that egg out for a couple hours to be at room temperature before I can make what I want to make, right? Because it's being cooked, there may not be any significant harm in that frame of time, considering we were just talking about food being at room temperature and bacteria growing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because like obviously we want to follow what the governmental standards are, but for many of us that grew up in parts of the world where eggs were not refrigerated, we also didn't get sick, right? And it may not have been refrigerated, but let's face it, those eggs would not have been around for an extended period of time, let's say more than a week, because usually like I can speak, I can use my personal experience. Like we had a lot of like I guess you would call them wild chickens in the yard, right? Like we had our own within our property. And yeah, the chickens were always there. They laid their eggs. We had eggs. And again, like eggs would not last very long because like I don't think chickens lay that many eggs in a day. It's probably maybe one to two or three, maybe. I don't think it's more than that. And I mean, in our household, that is usually consumed the day or the next day, So to answer that question, some stuff may boil down to personal choice. Um, but we would, because we are within the confines of Canada, um, yeah, we may want to stick to the guidelines. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so as it comes to dairy products, we see here that there are different guidelines. And again, this boils down to temperature control. It boils down to the possibility of bacterial growth. So you see, they give you guidelines as to what freezes well, what does not, what you should not freeze, what you can freeze, and of course, when it comes to if you do freeze, like cheeses that can be frozen, when you use it, you may use it in baked goods. Um, some people may use it if they're making a smoothie that is going to be consumed right away, kind of thing. Um, so usually that's how dairy products work. Because dairy products seem to be one of those areas that cause quite a bit of challenge for a lot of people. And vegetables. Before we even discuss this, and we will discuss vegetables again, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, how do you feel about freezing vegetables? Do you freeze your vegetables?
Actually, that's what I do because I noticed that we don't consume a lot of it in time. So what I do is when I do grocery shopping, I clean everything, cut it into whatever pieces, and I put in Ziploc bags and freeze them. And we use it as we cook throughout the week or even longer.
Hi, I'm sorry, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, Jeanette, we can't hear you.
Kadra, is she aware of that we cannot hear her?
You?
Okay.
Now, were you?
Yes.
Okay,
Can you hear
hear
me?
you.
You can hear me now.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I apologize. I'm not sure what's happening today. Okay, I was saying, I can speak personally. There are some vegetables that I don't like to freeze because for me, it's about the texture, of some. But there are vegetables that are excellent in terms of freezing and then being able to be reused comfortably, right? Okay, so we're going to go back to the slide on veggies. All right. So it says here that, a lot of vegetables do well frozen over an extended period of time, right? Including tomatoes. And of course, tomatoes, if frozen, can always be used in stews or sauces. And tomatoes is one of those vegetables that can actually be pickled as well. And that is a good way of preserving and extending the shelf life. Okay. So we're going to get back to the PowerPoint. So I think I'm going to stop sharing this one. And we are going to resume the PowerPoint to continue. Okay. We can utilize freezing as a means of reducing waste. I think we've exhausted that in our conversation so far, and it certainly extends the shelf life of the items. For fruits, we can use them to make baked desserts or in smoothies. And like I said before, we can use the vegetables in soups, in casseroles, and just some fruits, like if we wanted to roast something, it tends to do very well, even though it's coming from a frozen state. So that brings us to this topic. Don't avoid the reduced rack at the grocery store. Like we said before, even though many items past the best before they may not be at its optimal quality of freshness, they are still usable and can be consumed quickly. And for some of these items, it is a great opportunity to purchase in bulk because we can get it at a good price and we can actually be creative in what we do with it. Again, to utilize it in a timely manner. Another thing we can do is don't be afraid to buy frozen vegetables. Sometimes we minimize how healthy they can be, but it's important to note that, when veggies are frozen, they are peaked at their optimal. So the nutrition is still there in them and they are flash frozen. So they're not left at the room temperature for an extended period of time before freezing. It's like it's prepared and frozen immediately. Try different recipes. I think one of the ladies mentioned that before. It's good when we have the opportunity to look at our budget and look at what is available, what is on sale. This is a great way to take those raw ingredients. Like someone said earlier, when she was growing up, her mom would say, "What's in the pantry?" Right? And based on what's in the pantry is what would be used, what would be consumed. They would create a dish out of that. And that is a great way for us to utilize products that we have today. There's so many tools, so many different apps. I know sometimes it may take a little bit of time for us to research, but like we could make that a family experience where we decide, okay, once a week, we're going to try a new recipe, maybe even outside of what we're culturally used to eating. And that can become a very fun tradition, within the family circle. And this is so important. If beyond the best before date and the expiry date, if you can apply these tips, it would certainly help you as you go forward. For grocery shopping, plan ahead, like make a list, stick to it, consider items like we said, like trying out a new recipe. Like if you spend a few minutes looking at a couple recipes, then when you go to the grocery store, you're purchasing the items that you need, take the time to go through your pantry. What is in the pantry? What do I really need? Whatever we can buy in bulk, we buy in bulk once we can come up with a plan for consumption. Avoid impulse shopping. So many times, and we are all guilty of this, we go into the grocery store for 2 items and we leave with a whole cart. You know, this is also contributing in the long term to food waste because we buy items that we don't use right away. We forget, or like one of our participants said earlier, she gets home and then it's like, oh, I had 2 of these already, right? So without taking away that impulse to buy, even though things may be on sale. And I did say, buying bulk when on sale. If you really don't need the product, just don't get it, right? And eat seasonally. If we do that, that would also help with food wastage. Why? Because fruits, for instance, that is in season in that particular time, it tends to be cheaper, right? It tends to be at its optimal in terms of nutrition because it's like that is the season for it. But over time, when we consume those seasonal foods, we may not see it as a big deal, but it could be, helping us to reduce some of the emissions because guess what? We eat seasonally, chances are we're eating locally. We're eating from within Canada versus products that have to be shipped in. And I know because of our climate, eating products that are shipped in is unavoidable, but like every little bit that we can do helps, right? Here are some resources that I worked with in putting this presentation together. And it is great resources for information. There is a website called Love Food Haste Waste Canada. And this is really an initiative from the National Zero Waste Council of Canada. We spoke about it earlier in terms of municipal governments partnering with that council in a collaborative effort to help reduce waste. There are tons of information on that website, including recipes, storing tips, all of that is there. Like I said, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, I specifically use this website because part of their mandate is to ensure food safety, right? To ensure that the food that we're eating is safe for consumption, right? And it is trackable, right? The Health Canada website, great information. The David Suzuki Foundation is a great place to find good information. And even our municipal websites, like it's important to know what is happening closer to home, right? When we think of Health Canada, we think of all of Canada. And someone may say, well, what's happening in BC does not necessarily affect me, right? And it may not, but we have municipal governments, we have our provincial government, and there are information out there, getting involved in small community groups like the Rexdale Women's Center that has that reduce, reuse, and recycle program, and other programs like that, like the community gardens, and all these small initiatives that are available, are great places to get information, but also participate and do your part in all of us, just trying to be a part of reducing waste. And I'd like to end with this little quote from a local holistic nutritionist that says, when we stick to the outside aisles of the store, life gets easier after a while. Eating without labels has a similar freedom to people without labels. Thank you guys so much for listening. We can continue the discussion. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to take, and I'll answer to the best of my ability. Anyone?
Thank you so much. About good information. Food vegetable.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding the dairy product, I realize like how less is the shelf life and how often we have to throw it out. You cannot freeze so many things. But why the things come in such a big packaging? Like they never sell them in small packages. If a family of 2 or 3, they can't use it in 2 or 3 days.
I totally understand that, and I agree. But I don't think we can necessarily override that. And part of the issue, again, like even if we look at waste, right? The smaller the packaging, it also means more containers, more plastics, more bottles. I mean, in the 50s, 60s, maybe even early 70s, they had the glass bottles. Now they don't have that. Milks come in bags, right? Plastic bags. So it's practical, and I agree, because using my own household as reference, we stopped using 2% milk, partially because it never gets consumed in time. Right? So some stuff is unavoidable. I know the governments are trying to do so many different things in terms of the reduction of plastics that we use. There is certainly a long way to go, right?
Right.
Long way to go. But I think part of the reason why they have maintained that for dairy in terms of what cannot be frozen, it's it's open. When we open a package, like air, like is there microbes in the atmosphere, right?
Right.
And of course, it's so microscopic we can't see that, right? But it certainly affects these products, right? And I mean, it's probably more chemical and more technical than I am able to fully explain. But I think that is the backdrop of it, and it's just a means of being as safe as possible. So yeah, like I mean that's a good question we can probably raise, with it. Maybe to our municipal governments that they can probably do something about that. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And sometimes when you go to the Costco, you buy things in bulk and then like, okay, it's cheaper for the value. And when you come home, I guess you pay the same amount because it gets wasted so much.
Yeah. So like even now when we're on tight budgets, it's so critical to really like plan ahead. Do I really need this? Like that's the question. Do I really need this? And we're all guilty of it. We are all guilty of it. Like, I mean, in my household, we try to cook maybe twice a week, and sometimes, younger members of my family may still buy takeout, but the question is, did you really need that takeout? Because there is food in the fridge, there's items that was purchased on a grocery list to alleviate, and of course, when you buy takeout, you're still supporting a business, so we need the circle to happen any way you look at it. However, in terms of the wastage, if food is being purchased, we bring it into the refrigerator, and that is the plan initially. Oh, I'll make a sandwich. I'll take a sandwich with me, or, I'll bring my food from home, because I know, it's like I'm trying to eat healthier and I know what's in my salad, or I know how I prepared my tacos or whatever, so that is a mind frame, but day-to-day activities does not always work that way. But if we can try to stick to a plan, it will certainly help a lot.
I agreed 100%.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you guys again so much. I really do appreciate the time. I appreciate you coming out, listening, be engaging. It is very encouraging for me, even as I gather the information and I share the information, that we can have a conversation about it. And like I said, I really hope that it sparks a conversation beyond just today, in your community, in your household, among your friends and family. Would you raise the conversation? Ask questions like, what do you feel about this? Did you know that the best before date is about quality, and it doesn't mean that the food cannot be consumed? Or did you know that there are 5 specific groups of food items that must have expiry date, right? Like, spark a conversation. Someone is asking for my contact info. Okay. I would put it in the chat.